Go. All right, and we are live, comrades. Welcome to CosmoCast. We got a very exciting show for you guys today. We got two guests coming on later to discuss the protests in Turkey, which are very promising from what it seems so far. And we're going to be discussing the Zohran campaign. Joining us to discuss Turkey, we're going to have a comrade from the youth section of the TKG, MAGA, and we're going to have Sid from the Marxist Unity Group discuss the Zohran campaign. He's been a volunteer for the campaign. But to get started, I think it's a good time to talk about what might be one of the most climactic political economic events of recent memory, which is these Trump tariffs, which seem to have absolutely confounded the business press. They've confounded me. I think they've confounded all of us. And
yeah, I think we're all a little confused.
Yeah, I think everyone is absolutely confused. There's a lot of economic anxiety among everyone. I have no idea when the prices are going to start going up, when I'm going to have to start really like rationing my my earnings. You know, it's when am I going to have to start farming my own food to get by? Like, it's all just very anxiety inducing, and I can't imagine it's different for anyone else. But surprisingly enough, there are people defending this stuff. So I don't know. What are your guys' initial impressions of Liberation Day, as they call it, in the incoming MAGA trade war?
Well, it's certainly liberated the capitalist class of about $5 trillion in the stock market.
Yeah.
It's been wild. My sense of it, man, is that there is no plan. There is absolutely no plan. It doesn't seem like they have worked out exactly what these tariffs are supposed to do. The way that Trump explains it is that he's responding to currency manipulations and like trade and trade unfair trade practices or whatever. The reality of the situation is that the US, everyone exports way more to the US than we export to them. And
right.
The reason is clear. It's because most other countries have nothing that they can pay us with or anything that they can buy from us. So this guy has sort of distorted the normal sort of trade relations and flipped it on his head to say, well, actually, the fact that they export so much from us doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we have an extremely strong currency or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that they're cheating us. So
yeah, it's like it's like upside down world systems theory, where it's the U.S. is like getting exploited by the poor countries, basically.
And so these tariffs, and they're actually not tariff rates at all. Like what he's done specifically is he's taken the level of what a country exports, or basically he's divided exports by imports, and he uses that ratio as a tariff rate. That's not what a tariff is, but it really just leads to really ridiculous situations where like Myanmar, for example, has like a ridiculous tariff rate. Myanmar's just had an earthquake like a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's just cruel.
So what's the effect of all this going to be? Like, obviously, we've seen the stock market kind of take a tumble. I can't imagine this will make, consumer goods any cheaper.
Well, the price of Diet Coke hasn't gone up yet. So.
That is what I care about. As long as Diet Coke is still, under $2.
Not yet. I mean, it's hard to see what the effect is going to be because, again, no one really knows what these people are doing. They've announced tariffs, but they haven't actually taken into effect yet. It's hard to say. But if they do actually implement those tariff rates, like, for example, 35% tariff rate, I think it was, for China, then really what that means is that anything you buy that comes from China is going to be 35% more expensive.
I know.
because the way the tariffs work is the importing agent pays the tariff. And in most cases, the importing agent is just an American subsidiary of the multinational corporation. So they're going to pass it on directly to anyone who buys, to consumers. That's how that's going to be dealt with. In terms of wider economic implications, well, it's gonna affect investment from firms. So, these multinational corporations, when they make plans to, for a new factory or whatever, anywhere, they do that like on 5+ year time frames. So the idea that there's this idea that the MAGA people have that, like, if you impose extremely high tariffs, then multinational corporations are going to be forced to onshore or like like build factories or whatever. The truth is that they're not going to do that because, one, they make these plans on 5+ year horizons, and implementing tariffs from one month to the next derails plans. No company's going to make plans of capital expenditure for $300+ billion if they don't know what the fucking tariff rate is going to be like a month from now.
Yeah.
So really what it leads to is corporations and capitalists withholding investment until things are clear. And, well, that leads to effects in the economy, which is that it's probably going to lead to a recession or contraction when productive consumption, aka investment, isn't happening.
Yeah, and it's not just the MAGA people, I'll say, who are making this argument about tariffs kind of leading to production returning to the U.S. I think we saw Jonah Furman, I think high up comms person in UAW leadership right now, kind of also echoing those talking points. I think citing like a couple of new factories in the U.S. is kind of evidence that these tariffs may actually be effective at bringing production back to the U.S. But I think you're right, Joseph. That is, people don't make plans based on what the tariff rate is going to be month to month, and on a broader sense, it does seem like the cat's a bit out of the bag when it comes to where industrial production is. So if this is a plan, to bring production back to the U.S., it does seem like it's cutting against global trends, and also like it does, there's also a lack of like real industrial policy that would kind of lead us in that direction beyond the tariffs.
Right. Like what's interesting about this to me is there's it's the way that they're trying to depend entirely on spontaneous market forces to just kick in and reindustrialize the country once they put in the tariffs, which is very much a market fundamentalist, neoliberal kind of mentality, of course. But at the same time, it's obviously very much not neoliberal in the sense that it's breaking with the whole foundation of global trade and free trade that's at the basis of neoliberalism. So there's something kind of schizophrenic about the policy in that sense, and that they're partially breaking with neoliberalism, but not entirely, because they still like believe in this kind of spontaneous market force ideology where if you just get the market in the right position, it will do the right things, basically, or the market will just do the right things in the right conditions if it's left to its devices properly.
It's an article of faith. It's I would say the Zizekian thing here. They're eating from the trash can of ideology. Like, they believe that they believe that this is going to work, but it isn't, because you're working against the dynamics of modern day like industrial capitalism.
Right.
You can't reverse the globalization, as it were.
Right. I mean, I think it's just the development of the forces of production itself creates a complex division of labor that by its like general nature is going to have to be global, just because of the complexity of production and just the nature of all the different inputs are going to need, regardless of it's a capitalist or even like a socialist system, right? So in this sense, it is going against the, I guess, the telos of history, which seems to be an increasingly global society. But I think when there, leftist analysis of neoliberalism has long warned that there will be a kind of revanchist, economic nationalist reaction to neoliberalism. And so I think a lot of people, they see what's going on here and they're confounded because Trump is so clearly backed by big business. He's clearly nakedly ruling and especially on behalf of tech capital, right? He's very much nakedly ruling on behalf of capitalist interests. Yet, and he clearly had a lot of finance capital on his side in the election. Yet, he's done something that really pisses these people off right now. And so it does kind of raise the question of how does the Marxist theory of the state make sense of this? How do we understand the state as I think Marx and Engels famously put it as the executive committee of the ruling class, yet at the same time, we've clearly seen do something that does genuinely piss off most of the ruling class. I think the petty bourgeois, the MAGA petty bourgeois, think this is going to be good for them. And I know this because I talked to some of these people, and they think that they tell me, "Oh, this is going to be great for my small business." So I'm all yeah. So
they're gonna be the first ones to get.
Yeah, and I said, listen, man, I wouldn't get your hopes up. This is, but yeah, there is a MAGA petty bourgeoisie, and this kind of that does kind of think that this is going to be good for them. But the high bourgeoisie, they're not feeling this. So yeah, what do we make of this kind of divergence here?
I think Palancis is vindicated in his theory of the state because they're split. They're not. It's not unanimous. If you read the business press, the smart money, as it were, are all what the hell is this guy doing?
Yeah,
but who's supported this?
Who supports it?
Seems like most people. Yeah, what fractions of business and capital are supportive of these tariffs? Where's this idea?
I don't know
coming from.
I don't know if you can speak of a particular faction or sector of capitalists. I think it's an ideological split. I think it's people who bought into MAGA and people who haven't, more or less. Because again, look at someone like Elon Musk. Elon Musk loses from these tariffs. He doesn't win anything. In fact, his net worth is evaporated by half in the last 2 months because of tariffs. So
yeah,
someone like that isn't supporting it because of his bottom line. They're supporting it because of they're lost in the MAGA sauce.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is I think there might be some kind of ideological plan here. Maybe not an actual economic plan that's practically engaged in reindustrializing the country and actually creating sustainable economic growth. But there is maybe an ideological plan here, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards. I'm trying to I do think we have to make sense of this in class terms. Yes, it is ideological, and and there is the autonomy, a relative autonomy of the state that we're clearly seeing here. And the state has to be able to have a relative autonomy, or else it won't be able to discipline capitals as a collective. But yeah, I think there is sorry, hold on. What I was gonna say is there is a faction of MAGA, the kind of white lumpen, Rust Belt, deindustrialized, kind of lumpenized, kind of lumpen proletariat, lumpen petty bourgeoisie, very much white labor aristocrat, ex-labor aristocrat, that kind of part of the MAGA base. They turn to MAGA because they do see Trump as someone who wants to reindustrialize America. And that is why you have the whole MAGA communism thing, because you do have this whole idea that these MAGA people are demanding the reindustrialization of America, which is to them communism or whatever. So I think that this is for that section of the MAGA coalition, I imagine, which I guess you would I called them the Middle American Radicals, which comes from Sam Francis, who was this paleocon guy who ended up I think actually has a big influence on Trump and MAGA. But the Middle American Radicals, I think, are kind of who this is for. It's not for a faction of capital per se, but it's for that part of the Trump base. And that part of the Trump base clashes with the tech guys. Like you saw that with the H-1B stuff. Like Vivek and Musk were all defending the H-1B visa stuff when whereas like all the like the middle American like radicals, like the more like white nationalist, like lumpen part of the Trump coalition is like, no, we don't want those Indians in here. Like so I think that's the kind of the contradiction that's going on here. At least it's not so much a faction of capital as it's like that part of the MAGA base.
Yeah, I would say I agree with a lot of that. I don't know if there's a definite faction of capital driving this, but I think there's a definite faction of capital that is stepping aside. And I think I don't know like what their particular like role in production is. I would imagine it's the financial capitalists for the simple fact that they're still gonna be able to trade. They can trade off of the volatility of whatever the hell is happening. It's not like there's many industrial American capitalists left that are going to benefit from protectionism.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's like some upstart, like, industrialists who think they're going to benefit from this. That, you have the Mark Andreessen, like, we're going to start, building America new, I guess. Like maybe there's some faction of venture capitalists who think that they're going to make money, like funding, like new industrial development. But if you want to actually do this, you have to do Stalin-style 5-year plans. Like, yeah. And despite the wishes of the ACP and all those people, Trump is not the modern day Stalin.
No, but it does seem like maybe this is part of a perhaps poorly planned attempt, but an attempt to sort of retain American hegemony, politically, but also on the economic market by basically saying like, we can set the terms of trade, and like you're gonna have to kind of respond to us. Eric from YouTube is saying, has any third worldist analyzed the tariffs as settle or crash out? Which I think is kind of a fun way to think about it. Like it is kind of, America cocoons being like, we need to get back to making America first, and this is a way to do it. And even if it's not totally economically rational, it is kind of an attempt to re-exert that hegemony, making America great again, like that kind of political. It's part of that political project. It's not clear how we can compete with China, economically in terms of industrial production and things like that.
They're definitely crashing out. If you go on Twitter, there's a lot of MAGA crashing out.
Hold on, let me actually find some good MAGA crash outs. There's the Benny Johnson one, I think, is one of the best ones. The Batya saga. There was another one, Batya. I can't remember how to say her name, but she's like with Barry Weiss's outfit, and she was like, she had like a full-on like MAGA communist moment. It was so funny. It was pure just like destruction of reason mode. Hold on, this Benny Johnson guy, I find him so hilarious. I've always found him to be just like one of the most hilarious MAGA influencers. Hold on.
Your character?
Let's start from the beginning.
Losing money costs you nothing. This is just the reality of life.
It literally does cost you something.
Young and dumb. How much money did you lose? Everyone loses money. Everyone loses money. It costs you nothing. In fact, it builds quite a bit of character. In fact, you learn a lot of lessons actually by losing money. Losing your character costs you everything. Losing your country costs you everything. There are things you can't get back. The government can print more money, and it will. Sadly, that's just the reality. It's fugazi. It's just that there's a boom and a bust every 10 years, and it's been that way since the invention of modern markets in the 1600s. The Dutch crash of 1649. You ever heard of it? It's just the way that it works. It's the way that like monetary policy.
It's just like the law of gravity, man.
The ups and downs, especially as the table gets reset. If you lose the character of your country, if your town gets hollowed out, give me that photo of that town, man. Give me the photo of that town in West Virginia. Your town gets hollowed out, and your entire neighborhood gets addicted to opioids, and your steel mill shuts down, and your farmers can't grow crops, and there's no more cattle ranchers, there's no more cowboys,
No more cowboys.
there's no more fishers, there's no more workers, and
Is
we're
this guy watching
completely,
Yellowstone?
totally
What is he
dependent
talking about?
upon slave labor peasants across Asia to make every good and service and pharmaceutical, then you've actually lost your country. And then we are the slaves. There you go.
We're the new slaves.
There we
West
go.
Virginia.
There's
If that's the case, you lost your
It's
country
so
a long
sad.
time ago.
That this was a factory that provided thousands of honest, good-hearted, steel-working jobs for our fellow countrymen. And it was ripped. The guts of it got ripped out and shipped by people like Mitch McConnell so that they could make a couple extra points in their portfolio to get stock swaps with Pan-Asian countries.
Pan-Asian countries.
And they sold out their countrymen, and I call that traitorism, actually. I think that's the definition of a traitor. You can lose money. You can lose points in your portfolio. It costs you absolutely nothing. You won't miss them when you're dead. Nobody ever had their net worth carved onto their tombstone. Doesn't even matter when you're on your deathbed. Who cares? It's just digits on a ledger. What
Man,
will
this is
matter
real coke.
did you
It is
prepare
real
for
coke.
your children? Did you view your country as something more than just an economic
And pretty
zone
fascist
and
too, Eric.
tax capital
Yeah, it's the
and
whole.
slaves
Your country is
in
more of an
China?
economic zone. It's people,
Yeah,
and
Put that up.
culture,
There's a
and
trial crying in the
I
casino.
Volk.
Is it really? I don't care. It's too good.
No,
The final
the
problem make
casino.
on this is who's the slave and who's the master?
It is the casino.
You know, if
He's unfortunately
pharmaceutical
good.
and automobile and phone,
Screwed.
all the wires in your home, every electronic in your home, if everything that you use in your life is wholly and totally built by a foreign power that hates you, then you're the slave.
Bro, weren't
I've
you
always thought of
taking money
America
from a
as the
foreign
master of the world,
power?
or as like an empire.
Pretty sure
It's
you were
not.
one of the guys taking money from Russia.
Not if
in
we
that
are
kind of
totally
case.
dependent and on our knees
Yeah, right.
before these third world goblin dictatorships.
Third world goblin dictatorship.
So it's time for a total
Oh
reset.
my god. Projection
It's
much.
time for them to know who's boss. And it's time for us to be the master once again. That's the point of this country, actually. To be the
But we
master of
are
our
the
destiny.
master of the world. The current trade system right now is the U.S. is the master, exploiting the labor of the third world. Like that's one of the things that gets me about these people is like they have this upside down world systems theory where they think like America is like are the Americans are like getting screwed over by the third world. Like
Everything he's complaining is a natural consequence of the fact that after the 70s and the 80s, when there was a fall in the rate of profit crisis, they shipped everything off to China. They shipped everything over there. That's the basis.
Yeah, and I think there's a contradiction in there too because he's like, oh, it doesn't matter if you lose money. It's just numbers. It's just you don't have your 401k on your tombstone when you die. But then he's like, look at this horrible thing that happened. This factory is gone. All these jobs are lost. It's like, well, yeah, the reason it's bad that those jobs are lost because people lost money. They lost their livelihood.
Yeah.
And you just said it doesn't fucking matter if you lose money in your livelihood. So which is it? Which is it?
Exactly. It's pretty incoherent. It is
And
coke. But I do think maybe that, I don't know, do you think that's the way that the Trump administration is thinking about this on a more ideological America first tip? Like doesn't seem to me, I can't really make economic sense of it.
Right?
Well,
It's hard to say what these people
I
are
feel like
thinking.
though if they were actually like doing like real messaging, like, listen, Americans, like things are gonna get hard, prices might go up, but we got a real plan to like make things better and help you out in the meantime. We're gonna have to tighten our belts, but it's gonna all work out in the long run. Like I mean, let's be honest. Like if we had a socialist revolution, like we would probably have to like do something similar. We would have to probably prepare like our people and be like, listen, like there's gonna be disruptions in supply chains. Like shit might get chaotic. Like some goods might be harder to get for a period of time. Like. But but we're gonna soldier through it, because we have a plan. But that's not really even what they're doing per se. They're just like saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you become poor because of this, because at least, we'll have a free country without foreigners controlling us.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it is just part of this great reset, I think is what Benny Johnson was calling it. But Doge, it does seem like it's maybe part of the same project of just like totally dismantling the system as it currently exists in order to reconstruct, maybe the tech utopian, dystopian
Right.
kind of reality, or at the very least something that is molded more in alignment with the Trump lackeys and things like that. Like someone in YouTube also says, kind of related to blowing up our current consensus. They write that a top UAW advisor went on the Doug Henwood's show, and they say that it seems like the UAW, in a single issue way, wants to blow up the NAFTA free trade consensus, and maybe that's a part of this project. It's this kind of totally dismantling what has come before, with not as much regard to what comes after.
That's
Right.
a Faustian bargain, if I've ever heard of one.
Well, I mean, my kind of initial reaction was this doesn't make sense in a pure economistic logic. But if we believe in this theory that Trump is kind of trying to usher in like a new order in alliance with tech capital, it does kind of make sense that this is a move of pure destruction, upon which maybe the idea is to recompose the global order. And I think the idea that I've seen thrown around is kind of returning to 19th century like great power, balance of power politics, where essentially like the idea is not so much to have American unipolarity as have like the financial oligarchy as unipolarity, and then you have different like states kind of have their zones of influence, and the financial oligarchy kind of sits above them all. It's kind of the idea that's, I think, and they're calling like this is like the kind of weird right-wing version of multipolarity. I see people talk about it. So I
think part of it is I think part of it has to do with what we've been discussing the last couple of weeks, which is the subterranean interests of people like Theo and like these people who kind of they want to do a reboot of the financial order. Part of it is to like, because when the left was having debates about like, is this the end of neoliberalism, like a couple of years ago, I never thought that the process would be accelerated by Trump imposing protectionist tariffs. It kind of does. I don't know. It feels like at least some thread of influence is there where they're like deliberately blowing this stuff up so that they can like and introduce what we've been talking about, their preferred financial infrastructure.
right, and so maybe it's like they're willing to take a loss. They're willing to accept like a period of chaos and a period of financial loss in the name of this political project where they'll be able to recompose the world system and the world financial system in a way that's beneficial to them. Which is why this just seems like pure destruction, zero purpose, zero plan, zero actual economic gain.
Someone asked, how do the tariffs even help tech?
I'm pretty sure they don't.
I mean, not directly. I mean, I would struggle to come up with an explanation.
Right. Yeah, I think this is one of those instances where pure economism doesn't work out. You can't explain this in terms of profit rates and in terms of capitalists just seeking out new profits. This is a case of the ruling class getting high on its ideological supply and instituting a policy against its own interest, and in the name of potentially of some kind of economic nationalism. I guess there really is a serious push to move towards economic nationalism,
which in some ways cuts against this idea of a great reset hinged on the collaboration of international capital, because that is more fundamentally a intra-national project.
Right.
National project. I'm curious though. It does seem like this is going to have pretty negative effects on the economy. It seems like it's going to contribute to moving us towards a recession, contribute towards inflation. how long do we think something like this can last? Do we think this could put the Trump administration in a weaker position? Do we think this will upset, both, capital, but also like kind of more lumpen Trump supporters who are now facing the effects of the recession, or perhaps they don't view it in these economic terms. But I'm curious how long we see this lasting and what we see the effects being.
I was actually wondering myself, and I was gonna pose the same question. My sense is that this can't last more than a few months. If the stock market keeps going down the way that it's going down, the bulk of the bourgeoisie are going to begin to be asking questions. And then it isn't just the stock market. Like after a few months, even without formally implementing tariffs, just the idea of tariffs are going to cause a reduction in global trade. And so I would imagine in like 3 or 4 months when the GDP numbers come out for this quarter, you're going to see a sharp contraction. And that's going to trigger like an even more generalized financial panic. So I give it 3 or 4 months maybe when the next GDP numbers come out, and then Trump has to do an about face and basically say, well, we won or whatever, like whatever the hell he's going to do to cope, and then back off from the tariffs.
Yeah, he's saying like, no matter what, the 10%, there's going to be 10% tariffs permanently there. Like no matter what happens. It's just, I don't know. It just feels like you're taking a hammer and just like breaking things, and you're not like if you're trying to develop industry, you use tariffs like strategically and very in a very targeted way on like specific industries. Like that's how I always understood it. Like tariffs are about import substitution on specific industries, and they're targeted and.
That's the story of American development of the 19th century.
Right, the American system, as the LaRoucheites love to obsess over.
Very high tariffs, industrial protectionism, and a lot of like patent stealing too. Incidentally another part of it.
It does remind me a little of the. Oh, you go ahead, Joseph.
No, I was just gonna say that like these like they're torching their own, like they set up this global trade system, if you recall, was set up after the end of World War II, and it was more or less made to benefit like American hegemony, and now they're taking a sledgehammer to it. It doesn't really make any sense to me.
It reminds me of the sort of tech ethos of move fast, break things, or this idea of disrupting
creative disruption.
That sort of tech right idea, creative destruction. That destruction is generative just by definition. I'm not sure if that is like literally the motivation, but it does have an awful lot of parallels to that idea, especially in the context of like the Doge cuts that we're seeing as well. But
it seems to be the underlying ideology is you destroy things and you hope the spontaneity of the market basically replaces them. And so it's really not a break from neoliberalism in that sense. That's what's getting me about it is it's like they're trying to like combine economic nationalism with like free market like economics.
It's just administratively inept. It's chaotic.
Yeah, it's just going to create chaos. It's probably going to, and I don't know. Some people are saying this is all preparation for war. I don't know there's obviously
the big rumor on social media, and I'm sure you've seen this, but the big rumor is that they're doing it on purpose so that they can buy everything for cheap, like buy all the stocks and whatever for cheap. I don't buy that at all, to be honest. Because
that's a little too conspiratorial,
it's gaining traction with people. I think a lot of people believe it, but the reason I don't believe it is because it's impossible to say, oh, we're just gonna have a little recession. You can't do that. It's impossible to control a recession like that.
The insanity.
Yeah, it does. Something that's been frustrating to me to see is the kind of the liberal punditry on social media taking a very, very strong stance against this, which, I would agree. I think this is not great for, for people everywhere. But the sort of contrast between this very strong militant stance against tariffs, while they, kind of modulate or express a willingness to capitulate to things like immigration policy and, trans policies, things like that, social issues. It is frustrating to see, to say the least, in terms of like.
Oh yeah, I mean they're totally willing to throw like whatever minorities they can find under the bus, and they're totally willing to just kind of, well, I guess it's bad that Trump is bombing Yemen, but Biden was doing that, so is it really that bad? The
market is where they draw the line, effectively.
Right.
And I guess that's what they have in common with the right, except they just don't share the ideological.
The market and the constitutional system.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold on. I want to play the that Badja Ungar Sargon clip because it's really hilarious where she's acting like this is some act of class war on behalf of the working class, and it's just, what are you talking about?
Countries stop. What I find so frustrating about the conversation around tariffs is that we all agree on the problem. We all agree that the deindustrialization of America led to the downward mobility of the American working class, deaths of despair, people working multiple jobs and not being able to afford the American dream. We all agree that it is deeply unfair for the American middle class to be bearing the burden of unfair tariffs from other countries. We all agree that it is great for the president to have leverage in order to demand reasonable things, like that countries stop allowing fentanyl to murder 100,000 Americans every year, and that Mexico do its part to police its own border. And yet when somebody has the courage to show up and say to Wall Street, screw you, I am waging war. I'm waging class warfare on behalf of the American working class. And you elites in Wall Street, you do what you need to do because I'm not going to stop fighting for the American working class. Suddenly, everybody is sitting around going, oh no, the stock market. Yeah, the stock market looks like that because the rich are punishing Trump for siding with the neglected and humiliated American working class over them. We have already seen these tariffs work, Pierce. The number of people crossing the southern border is at zero. Fentanyl is at record lows for the last 10 years. We have already seen $1.2 trillion in manufacturing invested in this country since January 21st. So they have already worked. Now, how long is Wall Street going to keep trying to punish this president for standing the American working class? I don't know, but I can tell you that the view from the street is people cannot believe that there is a president who is working for them, who is putting them first and telling Wall Street to go screw itself. Wall Street, which picked the Democrats for the last 3 election cycles in a row. That's what the real story is here. American Compass did a survey of just GOP voters. We know now that the majority of Americans who make under $100,000 a year now vote for the Republican Party. So that was almost a means-tested poll. And they found that 77% of GOP voters, the working class, not the elites, said that when they were asked, they said they would be willing to pay higher prices if it meant bringing back manufacturing, because of course in their mind they are going to be the beneficiaries of those manufacturing jobs. Yeah. About Canada, a lot of people are asking, why Canada? We love Canada. Canada are our friends. Why wage this, tariff war on Canada? And of course the answer is simple. Canada and Mexico are the back door to the American economy because we have this trade deal with them, the USMCA. So if there are no tariffs on China, if Canada and Mexico do not match our tariffs on China, China simply builds car manufacturing plants in Canada and in Mexico, which they have already done, and they use that in order to get tariff-free cars into the American market, which is exactly what President Trump is trying to get away from. So what he wants from them is for them to close that back door. And I just want to emphasize again, back in the 70s, when the majority of the GDP in America was in the middle class, right? That's kind of like the golden era that we look back to of when the economy was really healthy and working class people felt that they could afford a middle class life. 25% of our economy was in manufacturing. Today, The top 10% control over 60% of the GDP. And that is a direct result of the fact that only 10% of our economy is manufacturing. And the largest share, 20%, is
You guys
in
are so
finance
confused.
and real estate,
Yeah.
which is, of course,
So
how
who do
other
you think did
countries
this?
artificially we have artificially inflated the dollar, which makes the product of the American worker unaffordable. And so what the tariffs are doing are simply saying we are refusing the race to the bottom in wages. It is unfair to the American worker, which I think we have all basically agreed on at this.
Well, there's your MAGA communism. That's
I mean, she complains about deindustrialization. That was done by American capitalists, and then
Right.
they did that precisely at the moment when the U.S. labor movement was at its like highest point, like in terms of strength. That was why they did that. They're not bringing back manufacturing, least of all because you're not going to spend $3,000 for an iPhone, but also because they don't. That's just not how things work anymore.
Well, yeah, so I think the best argument about the whole like reshoring thing is that like these jobs, if they actually come back, they're going to be coming back in highly automated and highly labor efficient factories. They're not going to be employing like these hundreds of thousands of people like people imagine they're going to. It's really I think it's like 75% of the jobs lost are due to automation. It's not due to offshoring. Offshoring plays a role, obviously, but there's still manufacturing in America. It's just automated. And I think that's, the factor that people are really not thinking about here is the fact that capitalism is inherently going to seek to expel living labor at the expense of, going to invest in constant capital at the expense of living labor in order to raise productivity. And that's just how capitalism has always worked. It's always trying to, it relies on living labor, on variable capital, on wage labor in order to realize itself, yet it constantly is seeking to, throw it out and not have to rely on it. So yeah, I don't see manufacturing coming back. Even if they did like very like intelligent like manufacturing, like industrial trade policy with tariffs, and they actually did do this correctly, I don't think it would actually work out very effectively as a way to raise the living standards of workers and help labor come into a better place.
No, and I'm not so convinced that they want that. I mean, I know that's kind of what Batya is saying, but is that what the Trump administration really wants to do? I'm not.
No, they're not. I mean, that's what they're obviously like, she talks about like a race to the bottom in terms of wages, but like if they actually want to like bring back all this manufacturing and have it be globally competitive, like they're gonna have pretty low wages and working in there. Like Trump is gonna have to destroy minimum wage laws, destroy unions, and which he's obviously already happy to do. So yeah, we'll see how this all goes. I think it's going to be a disaster though, and I'm not looking forward to it.
We'll check back in a few months.
Yeah,
recession watch.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think it is interesting to see if this does lead to like a new configuration of the global economy, if there actually is this great historical moment of transition happening, which does kind of put Trump in this historical, moment where he's like ushering in a new era. But I don't know. He's too stupid for that as well. So in the end result, we'll probably just get a warlord era of some kind.
Well, despite the decline, or what we see as a decline, the U.S. is still hegemonic. So even if they're flailing around in desperation, they're still going to get some kind of concession. Like Vietnam is already negotiating concessions on tariffs.
Right. I mean, it's the whole negotiation angle. I think some people are saying that's just like cope from Trump people, but We'll see. We'll see. So, what do we have planned next? We have a guest in line soon. Let me message him. We're going to be talking about the Turkey protests, which are looking to be like a pretty big deal. I think the last big protests in Turkey were around 2012 with the Gezi Square, I think is the was the name of the park where those were all happening, and those were against the same government or Erdogan. And there's a second round of protests breaking out, and we managed to get a Turkish communist, Armargan, from TKG International Committee, to come on and tell us a firsthand perspective on what's going on in Turkey, because beyond the protests right now, Turkey seems to be a pretty fascinating spot geopolitically with what's going on with regards to Syria and Israel, obviously. Oh, and here he is in the lobby. Welcome, comrade.
Hello, hello.
Welcome.
So did I get your name right?
Close enough, don't worry about it.
Okay. So I was worried I was going to mispronounce your name and look like an
I
asshole.
mean, you already are, but we have this letter where you don't pronounce the G, but don't worry about it. Armagan works just fine for me.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here, and
Glad to be
excited
here.
to hear about what's going on in your country, because it looks like a pretty big deal. Is that correct? Is that a correct impression?
It is a correct impression because these have been the largest protests in about 12 years in the country, an entire decade. I think they
Right.
might be even bigger than the protests in 2013, the Gezi protests, but
Right.
I am not sure. About the same size, let's say.
Right. So basically, to give a little bit of background here, there's the you have the Erdogan government, and they jailed the leader of the Republican People's Party, CHP, and this guy's name is Ekrem Imamoglu. He's a mayor of Istanbul, correct?
He is the mayor of Istanbul, and as soon as, I think a day before he was arrested, he was announced to be the candidate of the main opposition, the Republican People's Party. But he is not the leader of the party. The leader of the party is Özgür Özel. He's not in jail and has been playing a important role in the protests.
Okay. And so they jail this guy because he's what's the legal pretext given? Like, are they just basically, is it just completely arbitrary, or is there any pretext at all?
To expand on that, I should actually explain the operation that the ruling government had in mind as they jailed İmamoğlu. The lawfare operation was not supposed to end with İmamoğlu. He was arrested for corruption and for terror ties. Both accusations were nonsense, of course, and that was pretty conclusively proven. And it was also an operation conducted using very dirty tactics that people in Turkey already know from very similar operations conducted in the early 2000s by the Gülen movement in cooperation with the current ruling government against the officer corps, against other civilian oppositionists. The plan that the ruling government had in mind was to very quickly, in a almost blitzkrieg style operation, first jail and appoint a trustee in the Istanbul municipality, the largest city in Istanbul. Then they would appoint another trustee and jail the municipal candidate, well, the mayor of the country's capital, Mansur Yavaş, who was also rumored to be angling for his own candidacy against Erdogan. And lastly, they would conduct a full-scale lawfare operation against the Republican People's Party, appoint a trustee, a temporary trustee over its leadership, conduct a managed, almost theatrical emergency congress, and appoint leaders that were vetted and that would essentially convert the main opposition party into a loyal opposition.
Right. Just completely turn it into a quisling of the regime and make it into a loyal opposition.
So yeah, it was supposed to be a full-scale assault against the people's right to vote.
Right, it's completely blatantly, it's a completely blatant attack on democracy.
Yeah, and of course, Turkey is no stranger to such operations. We had similar operations conducted against smaller municipalities, mostly concerning various mayors affiliated with or who had allied with the legal Kurdish Democratic Movement, the DEM party. We had already seen trustees appointed for municipalities that the opposition or the legal Kurdish Democratic Movement had won with insane margins. I'm talking like 60% of the vote, 70% of the vote. But nevertheless, they had conducted several operations across the country and even in some districts of Istanbul, where they would appoint government trustees and essentially forcefully take those municipalities away from either the Kurdish legal movement or the opposition. This operation was obviously far more significant because it was not just targeting Istanbul. I mean, targeting the whole of Istanbul alone will be a massive escalation of their existing tactics because it is the absolute largest city in the country and one of the largest cities in the entire world. But it was supposed to be an operation to take over the leadership of the main opposition party and essentially convert Turkey into a country that has the forms of bourgeois democratic republicanism, but essentially is ruled like, I don't know, Azerbaijan.
Right. Somebody says woo to them. But so I think one thing I was reading a little bit about these protests, and they did kind of bring up a little bit about the square where they're held, and I think it's a Saracan.
Saraçhane, yes.
Saraçhane, yes. And
before I talk about the Saraçhane protests and rallies, I should explain how the protest started because
right.
Although now, for a portion of the protest, the main opposition party can claim leadership or they can claim that they completely and fully represent the demands of the people in the protests. The protests actually started spontaneously in
as they usually kind of
campuses. I don't remember the university's name, unfortunately, but I think as soon as news of İmamoğlu's detention came out, university students started protesting and even overrunning some police barricades that had been set up. And after that, Saraçhane, which happens to have the Istanbul Municipal Palace, the ruling seat of the municipality there. Protests were concentrated there, but not just there. In many rally points, university campuses, and across the country, there were spontaneous as well as organized protests that had sprung up. I think we had thus far large-scale protests in 73 out of the country's 81 cities or provinces.
Wow. Yeah. We kind of had a similar moment yesterday where there were like protests in like all the major cities, but that's like a whole other thing. Less spontaneous, I think, but so yeah. So I think so very much the protests are very much a spontaneous thing. It's not just the CHP, but the CHP does step in and kind of claim leadership at a certain point, right?
Yes, and it will not be completely unfair to say that they play no role because more or less the outrage and anger of the people can be said to be concentrated in the personality of İmamoğlu because he has been jailed. Not just İmamoğlu, but other people that were jailed with him, such as Mahir Polat, even though he has severe health conditions and could very well die in custody. He already had to be sent to a hospital to check up on his health, and then he was immediately sent back to the almost infamous Silivri prison. But more than that, the reason for the explosion of protests across the country was the crisis of governance that the government had since the catastrophic earthquakes in the 6th of February in 2023, where it feels disgraceful to say, but our party, the Communist Party of Turkey, other left-wing parties such as the Workers' Party of Turkey, private humanitarians, and even some foreign aid teams arrived at the disaster zone before state relief efforts could be properly organized. And since then, there has been an acute crisis of governments. There has been a crisis of legitimacy as far as the ruling government is concerned. The AKP government cannot reasonably claim to have justification for its internal and external policies and operations by saying that we were voted in, so we get to do whatever we want, because they simply do not have that popular support anymore. Of course, after the earthquake, the exacerbation and the currently near catastrophic economic situation in Turkey also played a role. The general perception of hopelessness or a lack of a secure and dignified future also played a role. So I think it's more accurate to describe these protests as outbursts and expressions of this general feeling of anger, of outrage against the current government.
Right. So it's generally there's a political climate of anger towards the government, of illegitimacy of the government.
Yes.
That kind of describes the internal political situation. I think the geopolitical situation is also, I think, something that a lot of people tuning in are interested in hearing about, and how that kind of relates to what's going on, because the Turkish government is kind of playing this weird game where they kind of pretend to be against Israel, but then they don't actually really do anything. But now they're claiming that there's talk, and at least in the U.S. news, there's talk that Israel and Turkey are going to go to war because of Syria. Actually, I figured you would laugh at that because you're aware that Erdogan is no anti-Zionist.
There are two excerpts that I want to talk about to explain why I see that as laughable. One relates to the early relationship between Israel and Turkey. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, would complain that the relationship between Turkey and Israel was like a relationship between a husband and his mistress, where husband, which is supposed to be Turkey, will have his fun with Israel, and when friends and family come, he will kick him out. Pretend that this mistress doesn't exist. And the next excerpt, which is related to this, Yalçın Küçük, a very important Marxist intellectual that I admire, explained in the early 2000s that under the current government, the early years of the Erdogan government, this relationship between a mistress and the husband had completely become a husband and wife relationship where they have occasional domestic spats. He was, of course, referring to the earlier supposed crises between the Turkish state and Israel, such as the maybe famous 1-minute outburst in Davos from Erdogan, as well as the Mavi Marmara massacre, and other times where Turkey would recall its ambassadors, Israel would cut off diplomatic contact, but miraculously, trade volume between Turkey and Israel will expand 500% from the day Erdogan first took power until October 7th.
Right. Yeah, I think
regarding supposed clashes between Israel and Turkey in Syria, I think it's undeniable that there are clashes because, Israel did bomb every single airbase that Turkey was wishing to set up a military presence in and annihilated them. But it is not going to be a full-scale war to see whether Syria is in the Israeli sphere or in the Turkish sphere. It is more exactly an ongoing partition and an ongoing dissolution of the Syrian state as it existed. Well,
Right.
arguably, it didn't exist as a cohesive entity since 2011, but now even the present, even the pretense, even the UN seat of the Syrian Arab Republic is questionable. So we are currently seeing the dissolution of Syria into various zones that are
Right.
more neatly divided between the various regional and global powers. Israel definitely wants complete operational freedom in the south of Syria. Turkey has been salivating over Aleppo and the supposed Sunni core of Syria since the day the civil war started. And of course, we cannot exactly leave out Russia, Iran out of the equation, even though they seem to have lost more or less, their presence in Syria. And of course, we cannot forget the United States, which is ultimately gonna have to play the role of arbiter between all these regional and would-be global powers.
Right, right. So yeah, I think that does make sense. What you're saying is that it's not like Turkey and Israel are going to go at war. It's more so just a carving up of Syria between these different zones of influence, and ultimately, yeah, the U.S. is going to be the ultimate arbiter of all of this stuff, or at least it hopes to be.
Mhm. I mean, it has been more or less successful. I mean, I don't know if the current government in the White House exactly plays a role, or if it's just a continuation of existing structures left over from previous eras. But the integration of Rojava and the new Syrian government led by Jolani or Ahmed al-Shara has been proceeding without any visible cracks, and that cannot be explained except with American support
Right.
or American pressure on both sides.
Right, because the Al Jolani and his people, they're going to want to try to appeal to the West as we're not going to murder all the Kurds. We're not going to be like completely off page about human rights. We're not, and obviously the SDF is formally aligned with the U.S. So yeah, I think there probably is some pressure on there, but I also think the U.S. We're kind of just in pillage mode right now and just letting Israel basically get its way in the Middle East right now. And so I don't know if there really is much reasoning behind the policy lately.
I think the current freedom of action Israel has cannot be explained with lack of American pressure. It can better be explained by the success of the operation, the global imperialist operation
Right.
Led by Turkey and supported by Britain, America, Israel, Qatar, to finally topple the previous government in Syria
Right.
and actively destroy even the appearance of a organized Syrian military capability.
Right. I mean, the fact that they just started bombing the country immediately and just completely just trying to destroy any capacity to develop any kind of independent state after the fall of Assad, I think pretty much shows what the game plan there was from the beginning. It was to destroy any possibility of a coherent independent Syrian state.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it lines up with the whole U.S. history of going after any kind of Arab nationalism. And I guess Algeria would technically be the one kind of Arab nationalist state left that's still kind of part of that historic legacy, right?
It is, but it is questionable how much they even adhere to it, even on paper. I mean,
Right,
it was
right.
questionable how much Assad adhered to it.
Yeah,
was
I mean, Assad by the end was hardly
Uh,
the ideal Arab nationalist
and
ally anyway.
it is even questionable how much Saddam or Gaddafi adhered to it when they were overthrown. But yeah, as far as historical Arab national, well, I guess the Nasser era is concerned, that's more or less over now.
Yeah. Jack, you want to take some of these questions from YouTube that we're getting?
Yeah, sure. There are a few questions from YouTube for you, Armian, and then maybe we could wrap up by kind of talking about like what the future may hold in Turkey. What are some potential outcomes of this protest activity? How can we support and learn more? But yeah, Joseph, you go first, then we can get into these YouTube questions.
No, I mean, I also want to know like more about the movement itself. Like, like what are people thinking or talking about in this, like the protest movement against Erdogan, and like what kind of political discussions are coming up, what kind of debates, like what are people thinking?
It is a popular movement in every sense of the word. I mean, it has to be when in Saraçhane or Maltepe alone you had around 1.8 or 2.2 million people. But all left-wing organizations, particularly our party, I'm mostly going to talk about my party's efforts because I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of other leftist organizations for fear of misrepresenting them.
Fair enough.
As I said, the party had said since that the ruling government had a crisis of governance since the earthquakes, and that crisis had exacerbated due to the falling economic situation. And I want to expand more on this crisis of governance because from a foreign perspective, it might sound puzzling. Because from a foreign perspective, it looks like Turkey won in Syria, and Erdogan is designing the Turkish political scene as he wishes, both through the Kurdish solution process or the new solution process and the current arrest of İmamoğlu. All of that is true. The Turkish state and the ruling government has the ability to design Turkish politics as it wishes. That tends to happen when you have unquestioned power of governance, and they can also lead or participate in large-scale foreign influence and other operations. But the important thing here is that none of their operations inside the country or outside it were able to create any popular enthusiasm, were able to revive support for the ruling government or to bring legitimacy to their narrative of a strong Turkey, of a strong Turkey that can act independently outside, is economically self-sustaining inside, whatever else. When the Assad government fell, no one cared in Turkey, not a single person. I mean, there was no popular sentiment of, wow, these guys finally did it. They took down the evil Bashar al-Assad, which they had been fighting, who they had been fighting since 2011. Instead, people were outraged about the economic situation. Instead, they were outraged about individual scandals, such as an hotel fire that killed more than 70 people due to a horrific example of negligence and corruption, where they didn't install any fire exits or fire escapes, but instead just passed off internal stairways as fire exits, and when people tried to escape from them, they essentially turned into oxygenless stones. People suffocated that as they were trying to escape using these supposed fire exits. So, and as a result of this complete lack of support, the coalition that makes the current ruling government represented by Erdogan or the ruling party, ruling coalition parties, And by that, I mean various cliques of Turkish capital. I mean various religious orders, obviously the specific parties like the AKP, the AKP party, the nationalist MHP party, smaller parties. They were increasingly fighting each other as much as they were fighting the main opposition or fighting the people, let's say. It will not be unfair to say that if they did not try to attempt this operation to completely take over CHP, maybe in future months they would not have the ability to do so. You will have open revolts from or open conflicts between the ruling cliques that are ostensibly held together by the personality of Erdogan. As a result, when these protests happened, you also weren't able to really see any coherent response, coherent ideological and political response from the government, except blatant and horrific repression by the police. In response to these protests, our party has put out a statement upholding our dual responsibilities. Obviously, we are completely in support of these current protests, as they are protests for protecting the right to vote and other basic democratic gains. But we are also attempting to use our presence in the protests and our independent large-scale protests to ensure that the current outbursts of anger in the streets isn't canalized into the ballot box and smothered. Because we saw this after Gezi. After Gezi, all that the main opposition parties said was not provoke the people by going out to the streets, just express your anger through the ballot box. And Erdogan
Right.
won in the ballot box every single time. This gradually eroded any popular and mass-based sentiment of anger. Which is why before these protests also you had a general sentiment of unease, of frustration, but you had very little protests. You had individual strike actions, such as strikes in local food processing plants in Izmir, for example, the Lezita plant, and other small-scale strike actions across the country. You had individual protests within university campuses that were in response to government attempts to appoint trustees over them, such as in Boğaziçi University. But you barely saw anything like this, even though the economic situation was horrible 6 months before, and it is horrible now. Or the government's crisis of governance existed 4 months before and still exists now.
So I have a question kind of building off of what you just said and connecting to some questions that we're getting in from YouTube. I'm interested in this idea around like expanding the protest movement beyond purely the ballot box, beyond isolated strikes, etc. Randall Willite in the YouTube chat says that the protests seem to have transitioned primarily into boycott efforts. What's your assessment of that? How do you see things playing out next? I guess the broader question I would pose is, what do you view as the broader coordinated political action that the movement can be taking outside of the ballot box?
The boycotts are an interesting thing. Obviously, we agree that boycotts by themselves aren't enough, and popular anger should be expressed primarily in the streets and, if possible, in coordination with larger strikes. But the boycott movement is significant in my view because it was not really a sort of political party prepared plan to express anger. It was more of a spontaneous thing that developed mainly of discussions in social media. They were first targeted as general continuous boycotts of specific brands affiliated with the government, and through enough popular, how do you even say the word, enthusiasm, were converted into one-day general boycotts. They seem to have rattled the government enough to the point where the entire cabinet of the Republic of Turkey, including the foreign minister, including intelligence bureau chiefs, including industrial ministers, the entire AKP parliament members, and other people have been at work, essentially screaming at the people to not try the boycotts because they're not going to work, and because it's an assault against the Turkish national economy, blah, blah, blah. If possible, I want to show a photo that I found incredibly funny. I sent it to Don. And once you pull up that photo, I'm going to explain more about it. I sent it on Twitter.
On Twitter? Hold on.
Yes.
Okay, let me get that. Hold on, I gotta get it up on the Jumbotron here. I have it open in a different tab, so here we go.
Yes, this is a photo of the AKP youth wing members who were mobilized by their party chiefs to show themselves in places targeted by continuous boycotts to bring out the perception of the boycotts not working. Very
so convincing. So convincing.
Yes. There were other videos that were released immediately after boycotts were declared, where you had other members of the AKP youth wing, as well as ministers who were posing with empty cups and talking with empty cups and pretending that they were drinking from them. Because one of the firms that are targeted by the boycott is the firm Espresso Lab, which is a Turkish copycat of Starbucks, essentially. You also had very funny attempts to manipulate public understanding, where they said that, the opposition, they're boycotting Turkish coffee companies, but they're not boycotting the Israeli Starbucks, when a glance at Espresso Lab's global operations will have you find out that they are partners with the Moroccan royal family.
Right.
I'm sure you know.
Yeah, we've done episodes on Morocco and
Yeah,
stuff.
the incredibly friendly ties, let's say, between the Moroccan royal family and the Israeli state.
Right.
Very interesting. Maybe one more question before we wrap up.
Well, no, before that, I want to respond to Randall's question about the Republican People's Party's or the middle class's abandonment of Kurds over the
And
recent
maybe we could
decade.
put that on the screen so that
Yes.
others can, yeah, it's a great question.
The legal Kurdish movement feels they have to hold back, not because of a feeling of abandonment, but because they are currently in the process of a supposed peace deal with the government. And the main opposition party's policy could have been argued to be abandoning Kurds, especially Kurds in the larger cities. But you can also very easily argue that through the Kent Uzlaşısı or the city compromise doctrine that they had actually begun to incorporate Kurds, or not just begun, but extensively incorporate Kurds in the cities in their own political projects. I mean, some of the latest trustee operations were targeting CHP municipalities in Istanbul, Izmir, and other larger cities because the government accused them of collaborating with terrorist groups because of the city compromise doctrine that they had. Currently, the main reason, at least in my view, of the Kurdish legal movement's lack of explicit support or actionable support for the current protest is because they have a deal ongoing, a Kurdish peace process ongoing, which involves Abdullah Öcalan himself, which is another topic that one can discuss for hours and hours on end.
Oh yeah,
But
that's absolutely.
I shouldn't dump all the developments within the Turkish political scene or the regional political scene, because the current peace process obviously also includes the Iraqi. It includes Rojava in Syria, and it could even at a later date involve the Kurdish majority regions in Iran as well. But yeah, I shouldn't bore you with that much stuff. So yeah, proceed as you will if you have any additional questions.
Definitely not a bore. Armian, this has been so great. We really appreciate having you on. We'll have to have you on again to talk, future developments, as well as questions around, what's going on with the Kurdish movement. I know there was some questions about Turkey's role in Africa, in the Sahel region that I don't think we'll have time to get to today. But this just, goes to show we'll have to have you on more to talk about, further developments and other issues that involve Turkey. Maybe before we move on to our next guest, any plugs for us, any resources, any ways folks can support your organization or the movement going on right now?
Check the main website. So we have English translations of pretty much all of our statements, and also our international account. I'll send the links right now. I should have had them open. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, you can what you could do actually is you could put them in the chat. and I'll put the chat up on the screen so everyone can see it.
How do you put this in the chat?
Just in not in the private chat, but in like the public one.
I
This chat's okay.
don't think I have any idea how to do that.
Oh, that's you're good. I gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, so here is the Twitter page for TKP International up on the screen. Yeah, right. At the very top of their Twitter page, I got a statement on the protests.
And then throw the link to the website in the.
Yeah, I'm about to put the link in there too.
Perfect.
Read the
here is the official website.
Read the political report from our most recent Congress. It obviously doesn't talk about the latest developments because, well, Assad fell, the Kurdish peace process happened. The war or the genocide in Gaza ended with a ceasefire and then began again. And the protests happened since then. But I think you'll find that the clarity of the resolutions and the statements in our political report show that by looking at the party's statements alone, you could have more or less not predicted, but made sense of all current developments and maybe future developments that will happen in the country, in the region, and perhaps in the world. But yeah, we'll have to see. There was a question about the tariffs, about the Turkish economy, and I also listened to your previous discussion about the economic effects of tariffs in your own country. And yeah, you can't really dig deeper into hell, at least as far as Turkey is concerned. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe you can. But for you people, Americans, probably, if the tariffs continue, maybe everyone in the globe, welcome to our life and congratulations.
Yes.
For tariffs impacting Turkey, yeah, let's see. I mean, I don't think they can impact that much more. The government burned through $30 billion in reserves that were scrounged up from the people using insanely cruel, insanely harsh austerity policies by Mehmet Şimşek, and they burned through it in 3 days. And they're now beginning to increase prices on gas, electricity, day-to-day existence. So I don't want to say that the Turkish economic situation is such that there's nowhere to go but up, but it might as well be.
I hate to say it, but it always can get worse. But
saying something like that seems like playing with fire.
yeah. Either way, the future holds very interesting things, and thanks for coming on.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for that.
This was very informative. I think definitely gonna have to follow up and have you on again soon. Yep. Thank you so much, Amaryan. And
thanks very much, Conrad.
Next on is Sid. So let's see. Oh wait, not mean to take Jack out. Sid, welcome on.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. Are you able to hear me all right?
We're happy to have you, Sid. Say it again.
Hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you. Welcome to the stream.
Yeah.
We're going back to the States with this section, specifically to the greatest city in the United States, New York City. We've got a mayoral race going on right now. Democratic primaries in June. The New York City Democratic Socialists of America is running a candidate, current state assembly member Zoran Mamdani. Sid, among other things, is a member of New York City DSA and a current field lead with the Zohran campaign. He's been out in the streets knocking doors every weekend just about for the Zohran campaign. He's done some writing on the campaign as well on the Marxist Unity Group Socialist Tribune Substack. Definitely go and check that out. But we're really honored to be joined by Sid to kind of get an update from the campaign trail, and hear his thoughts of mayoral politics in New York City. So happy to have you, Sid. Maybe we could just start, for the folks who are not tuned into the day-to-day, local politics in New York City. Who's running for mayor? What's Zoran's deal? What's the state of play right now on the campaign trail?
Yeah, so again, wonderful to be here. The first thing that I want to mention is that my views that I'm presenting here are 100% my own. They do not represent the campaign's views, they do not represent DSA's views, and they do not represent the views of my faction, Marxist Unity Group, either. I am speaking primarily based on my own experiences helping build out the field program, helping lead our canvases in one of our most critical districts in the entire city, and really trying to figure out what I've learned from doing this electoral work in the field here. So yeah, Zoran Mamdani is a DSA-endorsed candidate for the mayor of New York. He's running in the Democratic primary, which is, as Jack mentioned, going to be on June 24th. And he is running in a fairly crowded field. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But he's running in a field that has a lot of different candidates in it, and one that, at least at the beginning, we thought it would be very difficult for him to define himself within. So he's running on a fairly simple platform, and when I lead canvases with oftentimes dozens of new volunteers, many returning volunteers, each week we go over the platform and what we talk about to voters. And if you followed Zoran Mamdani's incredible media presence, incredible fundraising, I want to be very clear that the field operation is just one part of this massive machine. If you've seen all that, you know that Mamdani is running on a platform of freezing the rent for rent-stabilized tenants in New York. He's running on free buses for all, something he already has done a little bit of in the state legislature. He's running on free childcare for all, which has been very motivating for new families in New York responding to our platform. And the final point that we always tell our canvassers to talk about, and it's kind of a quirky one, is wants to fight for city-run grocery stores. Of course, we have pilot programs for this type of thing all across New York, and it's proven to be a very successful platform just for talking to people. And of course, this is an electoral campaign, so the primary goal is, of course, securing these votes, getting Zoran elected. But there are so many other little pieces of this operation that I think make it important for Marxists to understand why we're doing it and what we, as people who want to build DSA into a strong fighting socialist party, are going to be able to do.
That's all very good stuff. I think that the state-run grocery stores, that's always been like one of the things that I thought was interesting. Could you kind of maybe speak a little bit just about like why you think that's so important to harp on?
Yeah, so I think the state-run grocery stores part is very useful for two pieces. So the first thing is that we have this is going to be a Democratic primary, right? So the electorate in this election is going to skew a little bit older, skew people who are rather politically plugged in, and are going to be dealing with certain sets of challenges. And one of the things that I tell canvassers is that often you will talk to voters in buildings with a lot of retirees, a lot of people on fixed income. And the first thing that I'll tell you is that if you try to talk to them about rent or housing, they're kind of give you this blank stare, because that's actually
Right.
not one of the things that they're really dealing with, right? The cost of living is high, but as far as paying for rent, a lot of them are doing kind of okay on that, or at least they don't really see mayoral politics as a solution for that. What they're much less insulated from, of course, though, is especially people who are collecting Social Security and maybe have shifted what assets they have into bonds and things like that, or high yield savings accounts, is they're very vulnerable to inflation, right? And specifically grocery prices. So that's one of the things that we really that the campaign and DSA collaboratively really came up with as something that would speak to this group of voters. And the reason that it's so useful to have a talking point like this is because it speaks to a broader idea that one of the things that this race can do is really expand the presence of DSA in different areas across the city. So if we have a campaign right now for mayor, this massive undertaking that is bringing roving armies of canvassers all across our city in all of these different districts, we're running this campaign and are able to lay some really important infrastructural groundwork for some of the other political challenges we have. And as you know, if you run a DSA campaign anywhere, you get a lot of money spent against you. You get a lot of attack ads. You get lobbying groups saying, frankly, racist things about our candidates a lot of times. And one of the things that we have to do in a lot of ways is inoculate the electorate against these attacks. So when we have a platform, whether we're talking about city-run grocery stores or some of Zoran's other accomplishments for elders, such as fighting to improve the number of things Medicare covers in the state of New York as a state legislator, we're doing the things that are inoculating the electorate against some of the attacks against us.
Right.
And as somebody who's canvassing in Bed-Stuy, that's a place where we ran a state legislative campaign last year and lost by a few points. This is building the structure to run another campaign in this district, and it's going to require a lot of conversations, a lot of that type of organizing to make sure we're successful.
And Sid, you mentioned inoculation against, kind of attacks from the right or from the center. Something I think was interesting, sort of the opposite of an attack that we saw from the center was actually Andrew Cuomo, who's like the kind of big centrist candidate running right now. Rather than attacking Zoran in this particular point, actually came out in support of the demand for free buses, I think at a recent mayoral forum event, basically kind of cribbing this demand and saying, I actually stand for free buses as well. So I wonder what your thoughts are on is that a good thing for the campaign? And maybe also what are some of the other attacks that you've been seeing either in the media or on the campaign trail?
Yeah, so one of the things that I tell canvassers a lot is you're going to get a lot of things you've heard before. You're going to get people saying, "Oh, how are you going to pay for this? Oh, how are you going to do all of these things?" Some very, basic anti-social democratic, anti-socialist, anti-whatever talking points you're going to deal with. But I think one of the things that emerged out of Cuomo and people sort of on the right flank of this Democratic primary, for those who are not following, Andrew Cuomo, who is a serial sexual harasser, killed many people by hiding data during the COVID pandemic, and notably shredded the pension system for city workers. Cuomo sort of represents the right flank of this Democratic primary right now, and he's polling very well. He's very firmly in first place. But he's also, as Jack mentioned, really trying to do some of these things that turn him into a faux progressive darling or whatever, which often involves tailing some of Zoran's policies. And I think that is That's interesting because it really affirms one of the things that DSA members talked about when we decided that we were going to run this mayoral campaign, right? Is that we saw one of the things that having Zoran in the race would do is create some serious political incentives to pull the other candidates to the left. And as I mentioned, because Zoran's communications apparatus is remarkable, he cut a video where he made fun of how other people in the race are now beginning to copy some of his policies. And I think that's cool because it is showing it is showing DSA's ability to produce ideology in public, right? It's showing DSA's ability to exert some amount of control over the discourse. Are things about free buses and stuff like that, is that the most important thing about being able to control the discourse? Well, not quite. I think it's good, but it's not necessarily what we as Marxists are really ultimately trying to accomplish. But it is showing our power as an organization. And as we continue to do this work, we'll be able to do more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say just from my personal experience, and then Donald, I'll let you go. Like, I've been doing some, organizing for the Zohran campaign within DC 37, my union, the Union of Public Sector Workers in New York City. And, to kind of Sid's point, when we first started having conversations about pursuing the DC 37 endorsement, trying to get DC 37 to endorse Zohran, this was back in January, February. I'll admit I was totally like, not going to happen. The union's totally undemocratic. It's a total waste of time to try to go through the formal apparatus, of decision making around the endorsement, rather to focus on let's just try to get people out to canvases and try to get people organized and build rank and file stuff, which we've been doing, all of that as well. But something that's been really shocking to me is that like the decision from DC 37 is likely going to happen sometime this month.
That's
exciting. And everything that I have been hearing is that they don't have a clear candidate. Cuomo, they don't like Cuomo because of tier 6. Eric Adams is kind of the other. He's our current mayor. He's kind of on the right flank as well. He's actually dropped out of the
Democratic race now, right?
He's running as an independent. Yeah.
Such a despicable
he's
individual. Not because he's running as an independent, just Eric Adams.
He's buddy with the Trump administration now too. He's done a number of pretty sick kind of appearances with the Trump administration. I think Honan, right, the immigration sort of secretary guy, they had an appearance on live TV where he basically just threatened Eric Adams, like you got to stay or else, we're going to take your money.
They have the sword of Damocles hanging over him. Well, not now because they dropped his they dropped his federal charges now.
Yeah, the charges are dropped. Yeah, but he's kind of dead in the water, it seems. But all this to say, I will admit to being surprised that like the race. Maybe not the race, but the D37 endorsement does seem open, and Zoran maybe it does suggest that this campaign has had a substantial inroads at shaping the conversation and so on. But Donald, sorry, I interrupted you. I think you had a question.
Well, I was just going to say like the Zoran campaign, like it's interesting to me because it's very much focused on bread and butter economic demands. And I would even go to say that it is kind of economistic. It's not exactly like my ideal campaign that I would run, but then again, like, I don't know, I'm not running an electoral campaign, but at the same time, like, it's not like he's going rightward on social issues. Like, he's not like taking the kind of, he's not moving to the right on issues of policing or sexuality he's very much a pro-Palestine candidate, for example. Like, he's taken a pretty bold stance against Zionism. I think there's ways to nitpick about things he said, but as far as a politician taking a stand against Zionism in this country, he's pretty damn good. But at the same time, like, he does put the economic issues at the forefront. He leads with the economic stuff. He's not like moving to the right on social issues in order to do a kind of like right-wing social democracy, but he does put the economic issues like kind of in the forefront, which I think is interesting. That's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, no, I definitely have a couple things to talk about with regards to that. So I think the economic the split between the economic and political demands is always very important, but I do want to talk about the economic and cultural demands too, because it's something that I really see over and over again as someone who is canvassing in Brooklyn a lot. Is that we have a lot of canvassers in Bed-Stuy, and they're really great. And one of the things that's really great about this group of canvassers is that they are it's a remarkably diverse group, right? We're pulling in a lot of Black volunteers from this neighborhood and from nearby neighborhoods that really see that they have this goal of bringing these economic demands to the forefront. But I think one of the things that I'm often talking to people is that there are some serious like demands about political control. I don't know if political control is the right word, that I think are really important to doing political work in Bed-Stuy, specifically around the idea of displacement, being priced out of the neighborhood. I think it's very, very clear to me that does not necessarily, when I talk to voters, especially Black voters who are renters, that demand isn't necessarily felt as an economic one. It really is felt as a political one, that the idea of having some amount of cultural and political control over the space of their neighborhood is really being threatened by a wide range of forces. And the thing that I have to remind canvassers, especially many who are new to the neighborhood, for example, is that one of the things that we're really fighting for here is we're fighting for this right to the city for Black residents in Bed-Stuy. That's the thing that comes up over and over again. And it's one of the things that I think makes me a very effective canvasser, is because I am really good at speaking that language of trying to preserve people's right to the city. People do not want to be displaced. People do not want their rent to go up. People do not want to see their neighbors be forced to leave. And I think really framing that as kind of a demand about what their rights to this place are has been really powerful to me. In terms of other more concrete political demands, I think there are some interesting structures at play, right? For the main goal of Zoran's campaign, the rent freeze, Zoran, when elected mayor, will freeze the rent of all the millions of rent stabilized tenants in New York City. And I think the first question that folks, especially fans of Cosmonaut, might ask is, wait, why can he do that? Why is he unilaterally able to carry out the rent freeze? Don't you need legislative authority to do that? And the answer in New York is no, right? The mayor has extremely broad control over the Rent Guidelines Board that controls the rent in rent stabilized apartments, as well as a wide range of city agencies with very little oversight from the city council or from democratic mandate. And I think dealing with some of those things and exposing a lot of those political contradictions is probably going to be very key for in the event that Zoran does take office. Examining those contradictions is probably going to be very important for maintaining the strength of our political movement as we move through these different phases.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sid. I think it's something we talk about a lot in Marxist Unity Group. Obviously, it's like, how do we forefront the battle for democracy, forefront political demands? And, I like the way that you're framing it, as these economic issues are sort of a way to get the foot in the door to then talk about these broader political issues, or even the economic issue is a symptom of a broader kind of political struggle. And then the conversation becomes, an organizing conversation around, you're having this economic issue. What is the underlying cause of it? Who are the culprits? How can we actually go about making the change? It seems like the Zoran campaign presents a really great opportunity to kind of have those conversations and then present DSA as kind of one of the organizing solutions to this challenge. So I really like that that approach, and it does seem like not only on the sort of articulation of political demands, but also presenting DSA as sort of an alternative and organizational approach to addressing these problems also seems like something that can be done through the campaign. And I'd be interested to hear your experiences sort of moving away from messaging a little bit towards the question around organization. Like, how has the campaign been at bringing new members into DSA, bringing people into political organization? What does that kind of look like in your experience?
Yeah, so this is, I think, one of the most important parts that for me to talk about. So I serve on the organizing committee of Central Brooklyn DSA. So I'm really involved in maintaining the political, the cultural space of our organization. And I think one of the things that we said as an organization, as when we endorsed Zoran Mamdani last year in 2024, is that we said this would be a massive boon for bringing people into DSA as an organization. So one of the things about electoral campaigns is that I mentioned that inoculating voters against propaganda is important. But one of the other things that I think electoral work really, really is important for doing is bringing in and developing new cadre. And as far as I can tell, since the beginning of the campaign, New York City DSA has gained hundreds of members, specifically members who are brought in because they were able to perform some sort of labor for the movement and are now interested in understanding what this is all about. Because I think when we're running this campaign, we obviously have a set of goals, right? The campaign wants to win, the campaign wants to get its volunteers out, the campaign wants to raise money. But it's us as DSA that are able to say, well, look, Zoran isn't just a candidate. He's a candidate backed by a movement that he trusts. That when we are talking about politics, when we are talking about what we want to fight for, he takes our ideas into account as we think about what world we're trying to build. And I think that for a lot of people who are showing up at my canvases, this is kind of a new concept to them. That this is something that people are really looking for in this era. They're looking for a type of coordinated politics that really only DSA is in a place to provide. I think one of the things that I always tell people about DSA is that DSA educates the whole political mind. When I help run the Central Brooklyn meetings, we will have people from all other areas of DSA, labor, tenant organizing, anti-war, give speeches, give report backs. And one of the best things to see for me is that after these meetings are over, you see all of these new members lined up to get contact information for these point people in these other areas of work. And I think that's so powerful, right? Because the campaign doesn't last forever, but what does is people's ability to remain organized, people's ability to remain a part of these structures and find a way to plug in. So I think as DSA members, it's really incumbent on us as organized cadre to be friendly, to be welcoming, but also to be able to answer the serious political questions that a lot of our new members are going to have about what we do as an organization and why it's important to actually have an organization and not just have a candidate. Oh, one more thing about that too. So I mentioned in 2024 in Bed-Stuy, we ran this very hard-fought campaign for a candidate named Ian Huntley. He was a PTA member, very good electoral organizer, ran for a state legislature on a platform of expanding rent stabilization, of course, pro-Palestine candidate as Zoran is, fighting for a lot of all of these same socialist planks, socialist principles, while having basically an entirely DSA-operated campaign. That was what was important about this, is that DSA really had been a part of this campaign pretty much in every conceivable way, which was great. He ends up losing by 5 points, and it's sad. We have our campaign. It's over, and that campaign helped spawn a lot of different ideas and practices that we have going on in Central Brooklyn now, especially with regards to community building. But a few weeks ago, when I was leading a canvas for Zoran, we had about 40 people show up. And that's normal for this campaign. Last year, 40 people showing up is an incredible number. 40 is normal now.
Right.
But Ian was there, and he came and gave a speech to these canvassers about his experience running for office, and mentioned that, of course, he is very, very strongly considering running again for that same seat next year in 2026. And it was incredible to watch all of these volunteers, the gears turning in their head, saying, oh, there's a long-term thing going on here, that we are
right.
the people who are leading this canvas, leading this venture, are thinking about the work that we're doing in a really, really big picture way. And that's the type of high politics that I think people are kind of looking for in the conversations that I've had. And of course, again, doing that work to inoculate the electorate, make them recognize us as people with a vision and a message that will, improve their lives, is what this is all about.
Totally. And I think it's been really incredible. I think this is general to the DSA electoral model, that like we do have a broader political project that we can bring people into. But I think the Zoran campaign has been a bit of a force multiplier, just in the sense of like the mayoral race is the largest political race outside of federal politics in New York City. And so all eyes are on this campaign. It brings in a lot more people, and it's also extends beyond one individual district across the whole city. And so you get more people talking and coordinating, around political strategy. Like my union, I don't think we would be able to have a kind of cross-local formation for a particular assembly candidate, or we could, but it would be, I think, harder to bring people together. Which brings me to a question I have for you, Sid, because as great as the Zoran campaign has been, I think when the chapter was initially considering the question of whether or not to endorse, for many, it did seem as if, or the argument seemed to be, that the Zoran campaign was actually a bit of a departure from the existing electoral model within New York City. And so I'm curious if you could speak a little to like what the arguments were, for or against endorsement leading up to it, and how those perspectives have maybe changed as the campaign has gone on.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is very clear about DSA's, New York City DSA's electoral strategy, from very early on, there's always this emphasis on running winnable races. That we send candidates, we stand candidates for elections primarily in places where we think there is a good chance of victory. And when Zoran's campaign was announced, people at first began to see this as a departure from the model, believing that this campaign was a much, much bigger long shot than other ventures that we had done in the past. To me, it was this really sincere recognition of kind of Engels' principle of using electoral work, running campaigns, as a way of showing one's strength, showing the strength of one's movement in the political sphere. And despite kind of a lot of trepidation about doing this, there seemed to be a pretty broad consensus that even though this campaign was a long shot, there would be a lot of other advantages, like that I've mentioned, including counting our forces, developing cadre, and putting out what feels like a much more programmatic vision for what the city of New York is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to serve people. Something that I think DSA, which is generally focused on the New York State legislature rather than the city in recent memory, something that we really needed. But of course, over time, one of the things that has happened is that as Zoran has really cleared the left lane of this race, or I should say the left or progressive lane of this race, there has been a recognition that this campaign isn't quite as much of a long shot as people thought it was. Andrew Cuomo is going to be very, very hard to beat.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone in DSA who really was putting this forward, I don't think anyone believed that this would be completely worthless if we lose. And I think that's why this is really remarkable to me, because we have a candidate that of course is running to win, but is also really getting a political message out there that is bringing people into something, that is exciting people about a better future, and maybe even getting DSA to figure out what exactly our city level political program, which we desperately need, is supposed to be.
Right. I think, there obviously, I think the elephant in the room is the danger of running for executive positions and then having to govern and being in a situation where you don't have the social base to deal with the revolt of the capitalist class and the police and all of the stuff that we predict Zoran would actually have to deal with if he were to win. But at the same time, there is you have a lot of people in DSA who constantly mocked the idea of running an agitational campaign that doesn't have a high chance of winning. And now essentially conceding that sometimes doing a campaign where the goals are agitation and organization and you might not necessarily win is justified. That was kind of a win for our arguments.
Yeah.
And I was happy to see that. Because the reality is we should be asking people to run more than once. If we shouldn't be telling people that they're going to expect to win the first time. The first time you run should probably be measuring your level of support, seeing where you have the most support, and then the second time you run is kind of consolidate that and build on that and actually trying to really win that time, I guess. So I think there is that contradiction there where he is running for an executive office. At the same time, he's running in a way that is more agitational and more of a kind of, I guess, tribune type of campaign than other campaigns. So it's interesting in that sense.
Could I add also the fact that he's also doing it in a very opportune moment in the political life of the city.
Exactly.
There is a kind of crisis of legitimacy with the collapse of the Adams administration and the fact that Andrew Cuomo is the only viable opposition. I think everybody's kind of looking, a lot of people in the city are kind of looking at the two choices and saying neither Adams nor Cuomo. And that gives Zoran a really big opening to present the sort of politics that probably would not have gone as far as it did now if it were under different political circumstances, if the city's Democratic Party were more stable, as it were. But I did want to pose a question. I mean, I guess the question is already posed. It's could we talk a little bit because when this started, I think everybody understood it in the terms that we were saying it, in terms of it being almost purely propagandistic venture. But it's gone from being a long shot to there's a very good possibility that he could win. So I guess I'd like to know more about what we're thinking about if he wins and what we're thinking about, for example, what the role of DSA is going to be as an intermediary between a Zoran administration and what's happening. What we're hopefully doing is building connections at the community level with this campaign.
Yeah. So I think this is a very important question, and one that I think is very, very under theorized in New York City DSA right now. And I think that under theorization is pretty risky. But but there are a few notes here. So if of course if Zoran wins the primary on June 24th, there of course I think it's very likely that he does become elected mayor of New York City. There's a lot of skullduggery that could go on in between, including the fact that Eric Adams is already running as an independent. Andrew Cuomo might somehow find a way to do the same. There might be other vote splitting type things that happen. We don't really know. But the period between the primary and the general, to me, is where DSA really needs to figure that out. Because one of the things that really defines DSA, and we've seen this yesterday with Socialist Majority Caucus producing a new article that kind of sought to define what their definition of power and political independence were. We have a lot of different opinions about what the state is for, how to use it, can we use it to achieve wins for the working class? And I think that under theorization is going to create a lot of confusion about how we engage with a future Zoran Mamdani administration, should one exist. On one hand, of course, we have something that I wrote about extensively. We have the police problem, right? If Zoran is elected mayor, he becomes the commander-in-chief of the New York Police Department. Well, sort of. The NYPD, of course, is a completely rogue organization that does not respond to really any amount of political power, and in fact can put its thumb on the scale in some incredible ways, as we've seen over the past 50 years of New York City history. And if Zoran is elected, of course, he becomes in charge of this. And even as he has a lot of really good ideas about how to restrict the political power of the NYPD, namely by completely gutting their communications department and their special resource group, which is, of course, the one we see brutalizing protesters. Well, the fact remains that like the status of American policing in U.S. cities is defined by colonial control, racism, and all of these things. And DSA not really having any sort of history of holding executive power, especially holding executive power essentially in a governing coalition with pro-cop, pro-police brutality liberals, is something that we're really going to have to navigate, especially as we, DSA, may end up getting blamed, getting targeted, getting asked some pretty serious questions by communities who are and will continue to be harmed by the New York Police Department in the period between now and when like hopefully it can be abolished. But I think really dealing with that executive power question is going to be a much bigger problem than when we think about the fact that DSA only has 2 out of 51 city council people right now. DSA is still very much a minority force in the legislative parts of the city, legislative parts of the state of New York, and certainly not something that has the mass support of New York's multiracial working class at the moment. And figuring out exactly how we transition from the Zoran campaign and to Zoran in office to actually building some of those things up is, to me, a scary question that I don't really have an answer to right now. It's one that DSA, I think, needs to use its robust democratic structures to put them to actual use to really resolve and think about how we feel about these things, because it will be a turning point in this organization pretty permanently, and we have to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one sort of question that I think about here is, you mentioned, Sid, there's a political program, right? Like freeze the rent, public grocery stores, free buses. The question, I think, is what's the political strategy to accomplish those goals if Zoran is mayor? I think you could see him taking a tack that is more similar to progressive Bill de Blasio, which is more, working within the existing political system, working within coalition to, freeze the rents. I think you could also see something more along the lines of like the Deb's last president, kind of more agitational model that aims to take on directly kind of, executive overreach and aims to the goal of the, mayoral, spot would be to sort of, leave it so that the mayor doesn't have the power to raise your rents anymore. That's something that is decided by renters, not the mayor. I think as well a little bit about like the Bernie Sanders sort of campaign, which I think also posed this question on some level, although maybe his odds of winning were not as high as much as we might have liked to believe that around the time of the Nevada primary. I know I did. But the thing I come back to is the invocation of this idea of Bernie as the organizer in chief, which I actually think is an area that the Zoran campaign is not totally leaned on. I think for good reason. Zoran is a great retail politician, and I think he is like very compelling at arguing his case. But I think at least from the campaign itself, I would imagine it's different to, when you have, canvassers actually talking, making conversations with people and bringing people into DSA. But the campaign, I don't think has totally leaned into this idea of like, we're going to change these things through a mass movement, to kind of transform our political system. And, I think that's another model that one could see at the executive level is pushing for these kinds of programmatic demands, but on the basis of mass movement organization, aimed towards kind of transforming the system that kind of stands in the way of accomplishing these goals. But I agree with you that it is kind of an under-theorized question that we've not totally sorted out. And, theorization aside, I think it's just a structural problem of the executive that you see time and time again across the world, with the Workers' Party in Brazil, even the Allende regime on some level, Morena in Mexico. Like, I think it is like a structural problem as well. But I think I used to be much more like Zoran should not win. If he wins, it would be a nightmare for DSA and the left. Now I kind of think it's a worthwhile opportunity, and there is actually a lot that we can gain. It's just the stakes, I think, are much higher.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see what happens.
Seize history.
Yeah, I think for me it's like I am absolutely terrified of all of these things, and I've written extensively about what the problems of seizing the executive under these circumstances are. I think for me it's just really being about being a sincere campaigner, right? Mm-hmm. Is that like I have different visions of what this is about than literally everyone that I'm canvassing with, right? That like some people are coming to this as people that might have chosen to support one of the other kind of progressive candidates and just happen to stumble on this one. Some of us are committed Marxists that have very, very comprehensive and skeptical and cynical theories of the state. And I think the idea that like I am engaging in what feels like tactical unity right now with all of these other people is really what feels good about this, because it means that we're creating this space to do politics and actually make people think about those questions, right? Like it's really it feels really good to have somebody like, especially one of my Black canvassers who will come and say, well, yeah, I'm really concerned about what this means for the NYPD once we win. And then I get to say, yeah, hey, what do you think about that? Like, what are you worried about? What concerns do you have? And how do you think we can use DSA to begin to engineer a response to them? And that really is what it's about to me, is that like a campaign is always going to be a space where people are there to capital D, capital S, do something, and really providing that space as a kind, welcoming organizer for people to ask these serious questions is really how we grow as Marxists, to me, and really how we grow as people who are engaged in a political strategy that is willing to fight for change in all aspects of life through all of the tactics available to us, including electioneering.
And the other question I have about this, maybe along the same lines of making a space to do stuff, making a space to develop collective political strategy, I wonder in the case of the other scenario, we've talked about the scenario where Zoran wins, but I think there are also a couple of losing scenarios. One, Zoran loses the primary in June, probably to Cuomo, or two, Zoran wins the primary in June, and similar to India Walton in Buffalo, who was a DSA-backed mayoral candidate who won the Democratic primary, she lost to a sort of mainstream Democratic candidate in actually a write-in campaign. Who I think actually that candidate actually ended up retiring to go work for the gaming industry, the kind of like lottery, like casino industry, and
Would be correct.
Yeah, classic upstate. I know Hochul, the governor, also has some ties. But anyways, I could see that scenario as well, resulting in a losing sort of outcome for the Zoran campaign, where Zoran wins the Democratic primary, and he's defeated by Adams or Cuomo running as an independent or a Republican. I think another scenario worth mentioning could be Zoran loses the Democratic primary and runs on a third party line, maybe the Working Families Party line. So I guess my general question to you, Sid, is what do you think our orientation should be along the vein of making space to do politics, to do stuff, to bring people into DSA, to get our message out there? What's the approach you would advocate for kind of in some of these losing scenarios?
So to me, for one, all of these losing scenarios you described actually seem pretty awesome to me. Even the idea of losing the primary and running an independent campaign, perhaps, or even a campaign on the Working Families Party ballot line, the idea of doing all of these other things, maybe winning a close race, anything that gets us in front of more voters, gets us to build up our base of volunteers without hopefully burning them out. All of them seem pretty good. The thing that is at the core of this, though, right, is really, really being intentional about finding ways for members to continue to do things and continue to participate after, right? That we have a lot of people showing up, we have a lot of people being brought in, we have a lot of people paying dues. That's important. People are paying dues to DSA because they've been brought in by this campaign. But what we really need, right, is we need people to show up and say, well, look at these losing scenarios. Actually, they are not that bad for our organization because it doesn't destroy us, right? We continue to exist. We continue to fight. We continue to organize. And hey, what did we learn from this? Let us use it. After the Ian Huntley campaign lost in 2024, it created the Socialism is the People campaign, which was, while being something I have a number of tactical disagreements with, was a tool for many of our electoral organizers to find ways to get involved in local communities in Bed-Stuy and continue their socialist agitation through new tactics. We have to have something like that after this campaign too, where we have a very clear and coherent and recognizable structure that we are pulling people into. People are here for this Zoran campaign because they are tired of a lot of things. I think they're tired of politics that lead nowhere. I think people on one hand are tired of the nonsense Justice Democrats, our revolution candidates that are backed by nameless nonprofits and can't really do anything to build a political program. And frankly, I think on the other side, people are really reassessing the validity and usefulness of mass protest, mass civil disobedience that we've seen sort of in the Black Lives Matter era in 2020, but also get a resurgence in the post-October 7th political sphere as well. I think there's obviously a space for that type of mass mobilization, but I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is the idea that people are showing up to electoral work not because they believe protest doesn't work or that the protests are too left-wing for them, but because they see this as like an important part of their holistic political practice that like now makes sense to them in a way that's not just, oh, elections are for Democratic partisan hacks.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that in my experience in the DC 37 sort of Zoran campaigning, where I think the constant challenge is how do you translate a sort of discrete campaign into ongoing activity. But it has been able to bring in folks who I think have that orientation that you mentioned, Sid, around this campaign being a part of their broader sort of holistic politics. And it's, enabled us to activate union members who have not been as active or, kind of in the activist kind of like milieu cadre of like the same, 30, 40, 50 people who form different, kind of factions within DC 37 every couple of years that end up kind of dwindling and restarting with the same group. Like this campaign has actually it's enlarging that pool more substantially than I've seen in the past. And it does seem like folks are already thinking about, okay, we have this broad, formation that cuts across locals that exists for the purpose of this political campaign. At the same time, we have these lists, we have these connections, we have this infrastructure. What do we want to do with it going forward has kind of been the question that people have started sort of talking about and exploring. And, we have our contract fight coming up in about a year or two. And folks are already sort of starting to think about how we take that structure and move it forward into, sustained organizing, labor organizing. So I think that the campaign has already been, very successful in my experience at that. And I do think as we get closer to June, I imagine we'll start to see more of that in the various kind of spaces in the campaign. One other thing, you mentioned, Sid, like the Ian Huntley campaign, kind of, despite his loss last year, kind of his interest in running next year. I think that's a trend that we've seen in New York City of, Jabari Brisport, for example, run for city council and lost on the Green Party line, and then ran a few years later for state senate, I believe, and won that race in the same district. And so I could see, for Zoran, a losing scenario could potentially lead towards a winning scenario at a comparably large scale, let's say a congressional race or something like that. So I do think that there's also just on a campaigning electoral level, a loss scenario that can lead us to, another strong campaign and potentially another, a new member of the squad, maybe a member of the squad who is even more connected to DSA as an organization. But very exciting stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the rest of this goes. And we'll have to have you on, Sid, to discuss more when we get to June and so on.
There's a long way to go.
There is, yeah. Any folks have any more questions? I guess, Sid, I was, something I'm always interested in is the kind of particularities of the individual voter. That's always something that I'm maybe surprised at or reminded of on the campaign trail, is just how idiosyncratic and sort of confusing individual voters, political views are. So I don't know if you have any stories from the campaign trail or any plugs or anything like that before we wrap up.
Yeah, I should talk to you about my favorite voter that I've encountered. And I should say, this is the very, very first person I talked to on the campaign trail. The very first person I talked to said very, very sincerely, deadpan, what is Zoran Mamdani's plan for reinstating city workers who were fired because they refused to take the vaccine?
Yeah.
And I tell this story at the beginning of every canvas. Is like, all of you here are also little mini politicians that are you are pivoting, you are dodging some questions, you are trying to show the sincerity of what you actually believe based on what you're sincere about. And of course I say, well, yeah, you just tell that voter, I'm not sure, but hey, what about thing you're good at talking about? And I really have to say that, like, if you are a socialist in the United States, really a socialist anywhere, but especially here because of the ways Americans so fetishize our so-called Republican form of government that we don't really have, really, please get involved in some electoral work. It's a very low-stakes way to talk to the multiracial working class voters around you and begin to get a picture of what people are mad about, what people are unhappy about, what has harmed people, and really begin to cobble that into something that you can build resembling a political program. If you are in New York, please come out. Please join us, because it is this field operation that is going to be building the groundwork for the future socialist party that we are trying to build. And it's also great. Yep, yeah. If we can post the link, you can find it. You can find a canvas near you. You can find a place to knock doors. You can find a place to meet other organizers. And my recommendation is that, like, if you are DSA cadre and watching this stream, this is a great way to talk to new members about what we do here. This is a great way to talk to new members about how much bigger than a single campaign this is. If you are not out doing this and you care about having your own views about DSA be shared, be discussed, have one-on-ones with canvassers. Just talk to people about what they're feeling. And because that's how this is going to work, right? This is the infrastructure. This is the place to be.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most exciting things going on in American politics right now. It's probably the only thing going on in American politics right now.
Yes, it is.
Dread and despair.
That Stop Oligarchy tour, it's filling the stands. It's filling the arenas.
Yeah, but it's not building anything.
What are they doing?
It's not building anything.
Yeah, it's not building any kind of collectivity that will actually, and politically, it's very weak, honestly. But yeah,
at the end of the day, he's going to pull a 2026 and tell everyone to vote for the Democrats. So
we have to have a plan. What's the point of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have a way to respond to it when that eventuality comes.
Yeah. There's an ask here. There are two asks. One ask is for the vote, but the second ask is you have to join up. You have to become a part of something, and that's the only way we do anything here.
Definitely. And I gotta say, Zoran is very good media. He's very good at speaking to the public, and he doesn't fall into like the cliches of that liberals often fall into. He doesn't end up sounding like a kind of moralizing college activist. He's very good at speaking to the issues and then communicating in a very friendly but forthright way. So I think there's a lot to learn from this campaign, even if it doesn't go the way we're hoping it goes. I think there's still going to be a lot built up through this process, just in terms of communication, just learning how to communicate. I think there's things we're going to learn. So it's very exciting stuff.
Yeah. So if you're in New York, sign up for the campaign. If you're not in New York, move to New York City. It's the time to come. Let's go.
Prepare to spend 50% of your paycheck on rent.
Yeah. But let's carpet bag for Zoran. No, if you're not in New York City, I think Sid, join DSA, canvass for a local elected. Let's have these conversations. Let's put Sid's social media account as well if folks want to keep up. I know you do a lot of writing, Sid, for our Socialist Tribune. Anything that folks should be keeping an eye out for coming up here that you're working on?
Yeah, I tweet a lot about this campaign. If you have any questions, just please DM me. I will have an answer that is much longer than the one you want.
And keep an eye out for more forthcoming pieces of writing from Sid. I know we've got a couple of things cooking that folks should be interested in. But thanks so much for taking the time today, Sid. I know we went a little bit long. We really appreciate you sticking around for this really great conversation. We'll have to pick it back up, sometime in June or maybe late May.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Sid. All right. I think we're pretty much ready to call it a day, guys.
I think so. This was a great stream. 2 guests. We've had 2 guests
today.
2 guests today. I think we'll have a good guest next week as well to talk about sort of picking back up our conversations on the tech right and
abundance.
The abundance folks. The kind of the chart. Everything is coming together. The ties are more and more clear. All roads lead back to San Francisco and the Yimbys and all these freaks and losers. So we can't get enough. We'll be talking more about that.
Yeah, we're going to have a very special guest next week. So stay tuned, guys. So we got 741 people watching right now. So I think this might be our best cast yet, actually.
I think so. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If you got suggestions, as always, feel free to, Donald's got his social media handle. Send any complaints in the DMs to Donald.
Yeah,
suggestions, let us know.
Sign up for the Cosmonaut Patreon as well, because I know tough economic times are coming ahead, and so give us your money. Anyway, that's all I got to say, guys. Have a good rest of your Sunday.
All right, take it easy, everybody.
Take it easy.
I see. How do you feel about this action today with all your things out in the street?
I hope that the communists blow you people up, man. You dig? That's where I am.